In this video, we're going to talk about X-ray crystallography, which is a pretty powerful tool for determining exactly what you made when you're not sure what you made it. So the first X-ray experiment was performed by Max von Laue in like 1912. He was using copper sulfate and a crystal of it that he had grown. And he was able to produce a diffraction pattern on a piece of photographic film, which is pretty cool. The arrangement of the particles and the distances between them are what determined that diffraction pattern that was seen. And when you strike a crystal with X-rays that then reflect, you can capture where they reflect to on film and have an idea of, and then infer something about the structure of the crystal that you shot the X-ray beam through. So let's take a look at a picture of this. Here we go. So here's an example of a X-ray diffraction pattern. And this was the one that was helped to use to determine the structure of DNA. So I know that like looking at that blob, it's kind of intimidating to be like, oh yes, let's just pull out a complicated structure from it. And when you're actually doing this in the lab, there's a, like you use programs to help actually crunch the math of actually determining what it is. But essentially what you're doing is you're taking an X-ray source, and that X-ray source then is funneled through a pinhole, so that way you have an X-ray laser essentially, and you aim it at a crystal. This means that if you're creating a new compound in a lab, you need to be able to grow a large enough crystal of that compound, so it's completely pure, to be able to then place and shine an X-ray through, which is a great challenge amongst synthetic chemists. So as that X-ray passes through the crystal structure, then it diffracts as it runs into all of these different atoms. And you'll get a diffraction pattern on the X-ray detector. This is single crystal X-ray diffraction. There's also something called powder X-ray crystal diffraction, where you take that crystal and you grind it up. And you create a fine powder on a slide, and then you shoot X-rays at the powder and have them bounce off and collect them in a detector. And in this case, you would have, if you ground up a crystal, I mean, as a human can grind it, right? And so it's not going to be totally pulverized. You'll have different faces of the crystal structure that'll be struck at different angles. And so then you'll take that data and try to work backwards to figure out what the structure was. So here's kind of a close-up on the atomic scale now that we've looked at the experiment. So if you had a crystal structure, these are our lattice points right here in the black dots. I'll highlight one green. And so you would have these lattice points all throughout your solid, and your X-ray beams would come in and would go until it hit one of these lattice points. And so that might be on the surface right here, this first lattice plane, or it might be on the second lattice plane or the third, or so on. And once it hits, it's going to diffract, and it will go away from the crystal in the same angle but opposite that it came in on. And then you can collect that diffracted beam in some sort of detector, be it photographic paper or not. And so that angle that the X-ray beam is coming towards the surface at will be the same angle that it's diffracted at. And if you make it smaller, you'll see a smaller angle diffracted away. So we can describe what's happening when we diffract an X-ray off our crystal structure using something called the Bragg equation right here. So let's break down these terms a little bit. So this n value is going to be the diffraction order, which will be an integer. This will be given to you for the most part in this class, especially. We'll get more into what the diffraction order, how we use that in upper division classes. The lambda is going to be the wavelength of our X-ray beam, typically given in something like picometers. Our d is going to be the distance between our lattice planes. And right now this image is showing 2 lattice planes. Here's 1 and here's 2. And then our angle is going to be delta. This is theta, theta. That's right here. So that angle coming in is the same angle coming out. That our X-rays are approaching the surface of the crystalline structure. And so we can take information about the wavelength and the angle of diffraction coming off and use that to determine what the distance is between the different planes in our lattice. And if we do that, we can get some information about, if these are atoms, right? We can get some information about the actual size of these atoms, because we can get radius information from it. And we can determine how closely packed these lattice planes are to one another. So let's look at an example. So we're going to have X-rays from a copper ray tube, which will be at 154 picometers. And they're going to be diffracted at an angle of 14.22 degrees. And we're looking at a crystal of silicon. So we're going to assume a first order diffraction, and we just want to determine what's the spacing between the atoms of silicon. So that spacing between the atoms of silicon, our goal here, that is going to be equal to D. So that's what we're really trying to calculate here. So we have our, make it our equation for up to D sine theta. So our n is going to be equal to 1. Our lambda, we're told, is 154 picometers. We want to calculate D, and our angle of diffraction is going to be 14.22 degrees. So I'm really just plugging into the Bragg equation to determine what that distance is. So I just really need to identify that that's the equation to use here and then plug in. So I'm going to rearrange this because that's kind of how I like to do it. I've got my order and my wavelength divided by 2 sine theta. So this will be equal to 154 picometers divided by 2 sine of 14.22 degrees. Plugging that into my calculator, I get a value that is 313.46. Or if I wanted to round to my 3 sig figs, what I put in, 313. And my units here are going to match the units of my wavelength, which is really also a measurement of length. So this is going to be in picometers. So my distance between my lattice planes is 313 picometers. So in the next series of videos, what we're going to do is try some sample problems. I've got 2 of them here, problems, 2 separate ones. So try these on your own and then watch the following videos, especially for number 2. It's helpful if you've already done the lab for this chapter, which kind of helps with thinking about the volume of a unit cell.